Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story, where each weekday we offer a brief lesson from a section of today's reading from the One-Year Bible. Jay Rivenbark and myself, Stephen Mizell, are joined by Sheryl Daughety today, and we're looking at the second half of Hebrews chapter 11. We're talking about faith and presumption and how that obedience can be costly at times, specifically in the life of Moses. And the reality is that faith is always going to cost us something, but unbelief costs us even more. And we're going to drill down on those. So get your Bible, pen and paper, and let's examine the Word of God together today. Hey everyone, we're continuing a conversation today for today's reading around Hebrews chapter 11, the Hall of Faith. And one of the things that we carry away from Hebrews chapter 11, from Abraham to Moses, is faith is shown not as a theory, but as a risk. Obedience that sacrifices, it endures, it overcomes fears that you might have. And I know yesterday you mentioned Rahab, who does show up a little bit later. She shows up in verse 31. By faith, the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. And, you know, the thing that she's known for, and we talked about this a little bit yesterday, is not that she lied about the spies. It was that she took them in, right? She was obedient in that part. But are there any other characters in the second half? You know, we hear from people like Joseph and Moses and Isaac in verse 20. You hear about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses, Rahab. And then when you get, the interesting thing is when you get down to 32, there are some people you would think would get more play than they do, like Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah and David and Samuel. And then some of the prophets that don't even get mentioned by name here. I'm just, let me ask a question that's not in here. I'm going to ask a different question that kick off. Is there somebody, a person in the Bible that you can think of that doesn't get listed here, that you go, I wonder why they were not listed, why they should have had a place in the Hall of Faith?
Well, I think some of the main ones that I think of are people who were either still alive or hadn't been gone for long because they were New Testament people. Are the ones that come, Paul, for instance, are one of the main ones that comes to my mind, the kind of faith he had to live the way that he did.
Yeah, this extensive list, this list that we're given are from the Old Testament. And I think part of that is because the people who would have been reading this at the time would have been familiar from the Hebrew Bible about these stories. And so, there are a lot of particularly New Testament ones that, because of the timing of it, didn't make the list.
The two for me that off the top of my head, I didn't prep for this question either. But I'm scanning through it just to make sure I was right. The two for me that are missing, one that is, from my perspective, completely shocking, is David. He's not mentioned in the Hall of Faith. The other one who's a piece of the story gets mentioned, but his name doesn't, is Joshua. So it talks about Moses and, how he grew up in Pharaoh's house, the whole story. By faith, people passed through the Red Sea on dry land. But verse 30 says, by faith, the walls of Jericho fell after the army had marched around them for 7 days. It has been talking about Moses. And then it goes to a time when Moses wasn't even present, but it doesn't mention Joshua. And it just goes to show you that sometimes you might get remembered, in a particular story, and sometimes you might not. You might not get there, because when you see people like Jephthah, who did have faith, but he also had foolishness, get mentioned here, and Jeremiah doesn't, Isaiah doesn't, David doesn't, Joshua doesn't. It's just one of those things that I question sometimes. But over and over again, he says, by faith, right? That's the theme of this. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell. By faith, the people walked through Egypt. By faith, they did all of these things. What distinguishes faith from presumption? What I mean is, that you presume it's going to happen. What's the difference between faith and presumption?
Well, I think of presumption as like sizing up a situation and kind of deducting what you think is most likely to happen, because it seems to be based more on circumstance than the past. And I think of faith as being built more on a learned trust of, like, I have faith in God because I know that He's good and He loves me, and because I have experienced it over and over again in my life under many different circumstances. I don't presume that He's good or that He's going to show up. I have faith that He is, because it's built on experiences in the past.
I wouldn't necessarily disagree with that assessment. I'm trying to think through, because there is some difference, but I think there are a lot of similarities too. Presumption, we know, can lead to sin. We take things for granted. I think faith keeps us from taking things for granted. We live by faith out of intentionality, with a thankful heart, all those things, whereas presumption is, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen. Whatever it is going to be. Whereas faith is more rooted in, as you said, who God is, that He's sovereign, His plan is best and perfect, rather than whatever life deals me, that's just the way it's going to be, or it's going to, and some people I know are this way, just whatever comes, it's going to be okay. It's going to work itself out.
Mm-hmm.
Part of that is who they are, how they're hardwired. Some of it, I think, is just their way of dealing with the uncertainties of life, rather than saying, God is who He is. I trust in Him. I'm going to walk with Him. I'm going to live by faith.
When I think of presumption, I think in terms of people assume that it's going to turn out a particular way. Mm-hmm. Where faith acts in obedience,
irregardless,
whether it turns out that way or not. Mm-hmm. That you can assume or presume that God is going to bless you, but faith says, I'm going to do what I need to do, whether He blesses me or not. Whether it turns out the way I want it. And I think about, Abraham is considered the father of the faith, but there were times he was obedient and there were times he was presumptuous. I think he was presumptuous with Eliezer, right? Eliezer was his servant. Is that right? And now I get in trouble when I start making, because they ain't in my notes.
You're presuming. Right,
I'm presuming, yeah. But he presumed that was what God wanted him to do, pass it down to him. I think the same is true with Hagar. I think that probably weighs more on Sarah than him. But they presumed, okay, this is the way to solve the problem. Whereas obedience was, you just keep doing what you're supposed to do, and God's going to work this out in the end. Moses, on the other hand, it says, and I just read it a second ago, it says, by faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. I don't recall, I could be wrong, but I don't recall us getting that information in the Old Testament, right? We get that information here. How does his life illustrate costly obedience? Because as I've been preparing for this particular question, I've thought about some things where Moses was concerned, and I've asked myself some questions that I don't think we have clear answers to, but based on my experience, I have some ideas. But I'm just curious from y'all, how does his life illustrate a costly obedience?
I had written down that same thing about the statement they made about him not wanting to be identified basically as part of Pharaoh's family.
Mm-hmm.
And how much that from the very beginning had cost him, because I'm sure people considered him royalty just because of the home that he grew up in.
I think they treated him as that.
Right.
It appears. Yeah.
That's what you had to assume from the situation. But for him to decide, I want to be identified as a Jew, I want to be identified with these people as opposed to living this easy life. I think that took a lot of faith. And certainly he had to have known it was going to be costly and cause a lot of conflicts, even if it was just between he and his household at the time.
Right.
But then the fact that he was called to go and release all these people out of slavery, and he had no idea really what he was walking into, except that it was going to be really hard. And there was going to be all sorts of internal conflict on top of that, with his family and the fact he'd grown up. Anyway, all those really difficult things, and that he went, even if he was reluctant and said, I can't do this. I can't even speak well in public. He still went. And then, like, we don't even talk about all of the plagues that they had to walk their way through and all of the horrible things that happened there. But then the fact that he wanders through the desert for 40 years with these people who consistently were ungrateful. They were complainers. They went right back to worshiping idols. I mean, he experienced all sorts of costly parts of his faith and obedience, down to the fact that he was not able to physically walk into the promised land that was their ultimate destination.
Yeah, the passage says when he grew up, at what age was that, we're not sure. My take on that, because you're right, we're not given all this information on the front side. The story leads us to believe, he was saved miraculously and he was raised by Pharaoh's daughter, and he lived in the palace and had all the privileges of Egypt. And then on that occasion, the one day when he lost his temper and killed a guy, and then he ran, which obviously he was grown up. He was certainly an adult then. I think the big test of his faith and his decision to suffer rather than enjoy the treasures of Egypt, and this list that we're given right here, I think was in the time when God spoke to him and he answered the call to come back. He made a decision. I know this is going to be costly, because I once was a part of those folks. I was associated with them. I had the privileges, and I've been on the run. He was a fugitive for 40 years, and to go back into that hostile environment, because when you leave somebody or a group of people, most often they don't look favorably on you when you circle back around. And so he knows, and I think he used the speech and those things. I think they were probably legitimate, but I think those external things were driven by maybe the anxiety inside of him, that when I go back, I know this is not going to be good. There's going to be a price to be paid, and but by faith, he chose to do it.
I don't know that we have a clear answer. The things that I ask myself about this is, it seems pretty clear that he has a stronger identity toward those Hebrew people before he leaves. Otherwise, he doesn't kill the Egyptians.
Exactly.
And I wonder, was the Lord dealing with him then? We go to the burning bush as the moment, right? But I have to feel like he has some inclination, because that he doesn't know how to decipher yet. I don't know if y'all, I can recall when I was this person, but I come across that with people from time to time, that they have some idea that they need to lead. They have some idea that God wants them to do something. They just don't know what to do with it quite yet. And they're a little bit reckless with it, if you will, and I think the Lord was dealing with him. Whether he renounced it at that point or not, we don't know. He was obviously interested because he's walking down among them. He's seeing what's going on. He's present there. And I think his natural instincts kick in and he kills, but he still, even when he comes back, has some kind of relationship, because everybody couldn't approach Pharaoh.
That's right.
He had the ability, the standing. Of course, I think that was part of God's plan anyway.
Sure, yeah.
Is to give him that in. And I wonder, this is completely off course, but I just want people to kind of see in my mind how crazy it goes. And I'm wondering if y'all ponder these things. I wonder if when he came back, if Pharaoh had wishes or Pharaoh's daughter has wishes at this point, that maybe he'll come back and we'll be one big happy family and we'll reconcile. Maybe, I wonder if he had any of those thoughts.
Yeah, well, it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility. Because he was 40 when he left, so he'd been there a long time. They had a lot of relationship, a lot of time together. And so to have those feelings or thoughts certainly would not have been out of the realm of possibility.
Yeah, but for him, that would have been not only denying who he was, but he would have to deny who he was to be able to turn a blind eye to what they were doing to his people.
Yeah.
So him coming back and becoming part of this big happy family meant, I am literally going to pretend that I don't see what you're doing to the people that I was born into.
Perhaps that was part of his struggle, of coming back, knowing there was going to be this tension and this pull to be back in relationship with the very people that God is sending you to deal with.
Yeah, and then, then that he ultimately is bringing plagues upon these very people.
Same people.
Yes, and I have thought about that part before, about the sorrow that it must have caused him to watch them choose their stubbornness and pride as opposed to doing what God was asking them to do, and how he knew in some regards he was responsible for those things because he was being obedient to God.
Right.
And how hard that must have been personally for him to watch the people that raised and loved him ultimately suffer greatly at his hand and at God's hand, in order for him to accomplish what God was calling him to do. He must have thought, I just don't want to do this anymore. How hard, like you said, how hard it must have been.
Occasionally I'll see someone that's in an inappropriate relationship or a wrong relationship, and they need to go back and do the right thing. It could be somebody who is committing adultery. That's the easy one, right? And part of the difficulty of doing the right thing is somebody that they have affection for being left and hurt, right? And so they it's hard for them to go back. The right thing is obvious, and I think from the outside we go, why should you care about them, right? Why should you care about them? Well, the reality is you have a relationship with them. There's no way that Moses didn't have some affinity to those people because they had raised him, cared for him, saved his life, and I think it had to be a burden. I would agree. Thank you for joining us today on this edition of One Single Story. Just remember that you should live your choices because your choices preach louder than your words, and the choices that you make have an impact on those around you. Hope you'll join us again tomorrow as we continue a conversation around our daily Bible reading.